Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how I made this simple jig to make finger joints like these ones here. To space out the finger joints, the key thing I'm going to be using is this piece of 3mm aluminium. It's 15mm or just over half an inch tall, but it's 3mm wide, which is the exact width of the kerf on my blade on my table saw. So that's going to mean that the spacing is going to be exactly right, as you can see, for the finger joints themselves. In a previous video you'll have seen me build this table saw sled for my DeWalt DW745 table saw. The jig itself sits on top of the sled and is secured using these bolts that go through the holes, and it's then secured using these. As you can see, it's secured now. This means it can be easily attached and detached. From the table saw sled. I start off by trimming a length of melamine to roughly match the width of the table saw sled. I offer up the piece of melamine to the front face of the table saw sled and space it 2 blade widths from the left. This is to make sure that the groove I'm going to cut is going to be exactly aligned for where I want it to be. I then cut a 10mm groove in the melamine itself. The base of the jig uses 18mm ply. For the aluminium to sit in, I cut a 5mm groove in the bottom of the plywood using my table saw. I then check the aluminium fits in the groove and that the melamine fits over the top. Because the plywood's slightly too wide for the aluminium piece I'm using, I rip it down on my table saw and then use some Gorilla Glue to glue in the aluminium. The melamine's then glued and screwed to the plywood, making sure that the grooves are lined over the piece of aluminium. To ensure the cutting element of the jig's in the right place, I use a square to align it to the front fence of the table saw sled. I then drill through from back to front. Because precision is important on this jig, I need to make sure that it's always going to be exactly aligned to the table saw sled. So I drill out the thread on some inserts. This is done on my pillar drill. I will ensure that the bolts don't move around. As you can see, the thread's been completely drilled out. There's a bit of burring which I'll remove with a file, but it will mean that the bolt itself can slide without moving around at all, as it would if it were just in a hole in bare wood. The insert nuts are then screwed into both the table saw sled itself and also to the jig into the melamine face. It makes a bit of a mess, but it doesn't matter, it's only cosmetic and won't impact the actual workings of the jig. Once the jig's constructed, it's time to slide the bolts through the holes in the table saw sled and then screw in from the back. Because the fence on the table saw sled is completely square with the blade, it means that the new cuts that I'm going to make using the jig are also going to be completely square and uniform. Because of the length of the piece of aluminium and the size of the jig, it means you can cut multiple pieces at once to save time. I'm just doing one here just to show how it's working, but I'm quite pleased with how it's worked out. the end of the video. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. If you didn't, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Also, please feel free to leave comments and suggestions in the comments section below. It's a very simple jig. It was quite simple to make. Took a bit of fiddling to get the exact width to make sure the fingers were spaced evenly. But I can see myself using it quite a lot in the future for when I want to make things with finger joints. If you're interested in any of my other videos, there'll be a link up here to some more, and also up here to some other videos. If you haven't already, please subscribe. You can subscribe down here, and hopefully see you again soon.